if your man can't make you come, I think the Linus can.
Okay, so I know we're called not a D.L.E, which stands for not a doctor, lawyer, engineer, but when I first read about Anna in an article on Refinery 29, I felt she had a super interesting story that was very relatable. We also have a lot of female listeners, and I think we can all learn a thing or two about female sexual pleasure. And also, who doesn't want to learn about sex? So, today, I have D.L.E. She's the co founder and CEO of Lioness, the startup that built the world's first and only smart vibrator that improves pleasure through biofeedback, orgasm data, and science. Anna was previously a mechanical engineer at Amazon, launching the Amazon Dash Button's original concept and the Kindle Voyage page press technology. She was most recently named one of Newsweek's 10 innovators disrupting healthcare, as well as Forbes 30 under 30. That's goals. And that clearly means that Anna knows what she's talking about. She is a big advocate in Lioness's mission to expand our understanding and research in female sexual pleasure through sex experiments. As she likes to say, do it for science. Hi,
Yay.
Anna. Welcome to Not a DLE.
Hi, thanks for having me. Sorry for breaking your streak of not being a Dr. Laura engineer.
No, this is a great way to break the streak because
Okay,
I think
good.
yeah. So I want to hear about the Linus. What is this smart vibrator?
Yeah, so we have the only smart vibrator currently on the market that gives you biofeedback orgasm data. So the whole idea is similar to any fitness tracker, right? Like you would track your sleep, your fitness, your nutrition, all of these different things. But what we're trying to do is measure your involuntary pelvic floor contractions. It's one of the best indicators for arousal and orgasm. And so the idea is that the more you use it, you actually get data and understand how your pleasure changes over time. So, what different factors, your sleep, your stress, all of these different things. So, really just giving people the tool in their own hands to learn about more about their own sexual pleasure.
That's so interesting. So you kind of compare it to like a fitness app, and so it's an app itself, and then you get to see like I guess the chart and the graphs of so like what kind of like data comes back.
Yeah, so what we're measuring is involuntary pelvic floor contractions. So in the 80s, there's a pretty popular research paper that was led by Bolin, and it was done in 1982, I believe. And so they know that when you have an orgasm, there's many things that happen. Your heart rate increases, your pupils dilate, you'll get perspiration, all these different things. But one of the other things you also will notice is that you have a pretty rhythmic contraction that happens during an orgasm in your pelvic floor muscles. So whether vaginal or anal, you'll still feel those pelvic floor contractions. So the whole idea is that we're measuring that because there's a really unique pattern that happens. So your graph will almost, we always say like it almost looks like your sleep pattern or your heart rate, how these like little blips happen, similar in that. You'll see that for orgasms as well.
That's interesting. So you talk about like mood and stress. Are those factors that affect if you will get an orgasm or not, or how strong it
Mm.
is?
Yeah, so I would say, well, so kind of the root stem of why we even started this company 8 years ago is that one of the things, I guess not surprising to most people, is that there is very, very little research that's done on female sexual pleasure and female sexual function. So if we look at it as a whole, we know that women's health, so health as a whole, like there's very little research that's done that's distinguishing female bodies from male bodies. Most typically, most things are based on like an average like guy, I would say, in a lot of ways. And so when we look at sexual pleasure, there's very, very little research. There's a lot on erectile dysfunction, erectile function, very little on female sexual function. So it's hard to say like from a data driven perspective or like a research perspective, what things do change your pleasure and all of that. I would say anecdotally, what we've seen, because, and it's the reason why we started this company, is that we want to expand the research around female sexual pleasure and actually understand what research is out there. How can we get more research out there to help people understand? Because the biggest thing is like, I grew up in a, super conservative family where we always asked like, I was like super shy of my own body, wondering if I'm normal, like if sexual pleasure, like masturbation, all these things are normal, or like how it functions, is it normal? So, stress and sleep I would say anecdotally, like from our user set, like we have seen a lot of like interesting, like stress, for example, for me, I actually can track how stressed I am before my aura ring can, because
Mm,
my orgasms look very, very different. Like if they get really, really small and sometimes they just completely disappear. And so it's kind of a cue for me knowing if I'm like going through a really stressful month. So I would say overall, yes, there are really interesting things. I've heard like even like research perspective, anecdotally, like sleep apnea could also cause maybe sexual dysfunction potentially. There's different, then we've seen even little things like caffeine make your orgasms better, or like
mm,
THC make your orgasms better. So we're kind of seeing all these little things, and the hope is to actually have enough data and have a researcher being able to publish papers around our findings.
yeah. So I want to rewind a little bit because you kind of talked about how you grew up in a conservative family, and I think that's like something that I read on the article on Refinery 29 that really drew me to you. Can you talk a little bit about your upbringing? Because, our platform, we mainly have an Asian demographic. And so, sex is a bit of a taboo subject in many
Yeah,
cultures. So I
totally.
kind of want to talk about, your experience growing up. Like, did you talk about sex at home? Did you get the
Yeah,
birds and the bees talk?
absolutely not.
Yeah.
If I could have told my like even 20-year-old self that this is where my career was going to go, and like this is what I would be so passionate about, I would think that's like very insane on my side, because I grew up in a really conservative religious family. I grew up in Korea till I was 7, and then we moved to LA, and then I moved to the Bay Area when I was 18.
Mm,
But I grew up in a pretty strict, like, I would say a typical Korean household. We never talked about sex growing up. I was very scared of my body to my mid 20s. So I think people, when they meet me now, because I am so much more open, or I can talk about things like, I guess, just more openly, like people think that I came from somewhere where I felt very like comfortable with myself. But even when we started the company, in the very get go, I was very much like, I just want to be a really good engineer. Do not put me in interviews. Like, do not make me talk about my own sexual pleasure. Like, I had owned maybe like one cheapy vibrator by the time we started the company. Like, I was very like nervous of my own body, and there was a lot of fear that like I didn't feel like I had ownership over my body, or like that I didn't feel like I deserved to be so sexually open. And I think
mhm,
it was like many years of me working on this company, understanding the science, like the research, and just realizing that it's more of a societal failure of it's a society thing that like we women, especially women, are put in this place where we have to feel so uncomfortable with being a sexual person. And so I would say, yeah, like I was actually, when I quit my job at Amazon to start this company, I actually didn't tell my parents for, I want to say, like almost a year, because I
wow.
don't know. I'm like an adult at this point, but I'm still scared of my mom, in the sense that I'm still her daughter, and when she yells, it's still scary. So when I quit, I was like so scared to tell her like that I was going to start doing this thing, and then especially in this field.
Mhm,
So it definitely took a lot of long time, and my parents only speak Korean even to this day. So it was even more of a barrier of like, I can speak conversationally, but I don't know like the terms of like sexual pleasure, or like, this feel like I don't know how to express in Korean, like feeling like I didn't have ownership over my own body. Like that's not a sentence I would know how to say. So it was a lot of shame, and on top of it, just the language barrier, I would say, to like really connect with my parents when I first started.
yeah. So, I mean, how okay, when you did end up telling them a year later, how was that conversation like?
Yeah, I used to give this advice. I think a lot of, because I think a lot of times young Asian people, like, I think, are curious how kind of navigating something if they want to do something, but they're scared to do it. I don't
Mhm.
know if this is good advice or bad advice, but I think up to that year, I had already taken my time kind of like scaring my parents in a lot of ways. Like, in the sense, like, it wasn't even things that I was like doing bad. Like, I was a fairly like calm kid. Like if I was like out late at night, it was because I was at Denny's with my friends playing like card games. Like I wasn't doing anything, but to her, I think because it was just this whole perspective. But so like it was like little things. Like I got a tattoo, and like when I think when I was like 18 or something, and when she found it, she flipped out. That was maybe the first scariest moment that I've ever had with my mom, was when she found out I had a tattoo. And so it's just these little things, right? Like I was like, okay, I'm gonna go to school up in the Bay Area. Like I'm not staying in LA. Like at home, all this stuff. And then and then I started like dyeing my hair like pink and purple. And then so I think she started getting inklings that maybe I just, whether was going through like a rebellious phase or just this idea of like that I like kind of putting myself out there. And then I think there was a moment where I had shaved my head, like I completely shaved my head on my birthday, and I
Wow.
really wish I had a good explanation why. I just, my friend was doing it and she was like, do you want to do it? And I was like, yeah, I'm like super down. So I think my mom already had, I kind of teed her up in some weird shape or form that I was
You had a little
maybe, I
Britney
don't know.
Spears moment.
Yeah, but like in a good way. Like I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, in a
like
good way.
I'm just exploring like who I am as a person. Like I think looking like figuring out what my identity is. And so when she came to visit me in San Francisco, I was like, okay, I have to tell her. Like she's like wondering why, like, all these things, and we weren't paying ourselves for like a year and a half when we started the company. And then she was like, I'm gonna come visit, and I knew I was gonna tell her. And she came up to our like startup kind of like hot desk area. So we had like one table. I had all these sex toys laid out, and I like broke them all apart because I was looking at like how they built it, like all this stuff, right? And I was
Yeah.
like explaining to her the best I could in terms of like why this was so important to me. And she knew that I like had some like reservations about like I think she knew a little bit of like I didn't feel comfortable in my own body, or like wasn't feeling like, yeah, like comfortable. And so she was really quiet while I was like explaining like that this was almost like an exploration for myself of like understanding my own body, my own journey on it. And then she eventually was like, when I was younger, like I used to have a vibrator. And I was like,
Oh.
oh, that's cool. And then for the next 2 hours, like we talked about like our sex lives. Like she was asking when I had sex for the first time, like just, like giving each, it was very like almost like a sister moment of like having this very open conversation. And it was incredibly beautiful and disgusting all at the same time. Uh, Very grateful because I think, yeah, like when do you ever get to have a conversation like that with your mom?
Right.
But at the same time, I like never want to do it again. Like I'm so I'm such an advocate for like sexual pleasure being like an open conversation, but just something about when it comes to your parents, it's very horrifying.
Yeah,
Um
you don't want to hear about your parents having sex. It's a
no, like even the idea of like them owning a vibrator is like super cool, but also at the same time like, oh my god, like that's a lot to know.
yeah,
They're still your
yeah.
parents.
Yeah,
So
yeah, fair.
yeah, so I'm very grateful that like both my mom and my dad have been, I think, in the grander scheme, like very open and just
Mhm.
very accepting over the years. I've been doing this for 8 years at this point. I think they're like fairly like okay, but they still ask me time to time like when I'm going to go back to a corporate job. So I think the concept of startups is not there, and then the concept of like that I would do something in the sexual pleasure space for forever is also not there. So I don't fault him on it. I think it's kind of funny from time to time. But yeah, I think overall I'm proud of how my parents responded because I definitely thought it was gonna be worse.
Yeah, like especially coming from such a conservative and religious background, right? It
Right.
kind of like I guess like they also probably, you know, how they were brought up as well. Like they weren't allowed to talk about it. And so, this is probably like a breath of fresh air for them to even have the space to talk about it too.
Totally. I think that's the biggest thing I'm learning over the years. Like most recently especially is like people say like your parents are people too, like they're learning just as much as you are, like they're humans that have flaws. And I think that was like the first time I really came to terms with that concept of like that's true, like I don't fault them for the things that they've done. I think they did the best they could with the tools they had at the time. So like
Mhm.
yeah, I think as I get older I think especially people that are like first gen, 1.5 gen, second gen Asians like will really kind of resonate with that concept because we grew up in this like in between world. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely feel that where it's like you like you see your friends and they're more liberated in their bodies. But then
Yeah.
you also grew up, being feeling that kind of shame, and you're just stuck in this in between where you don't know when you want to do something but you feel bad about it. So, good
Yes.
on you for, just rebelling. And that's actually why I really wanted you on the show, because I mean, the show isn't like, oh, we cannot speak to, obviously, and it's not about that. It's about, rebelling against expectations and just going for what you want to do. And that's what
Totally.
you did. And that's awesome. Okay,
Thank you.
so
Yeah.
yeah, so I kind of want to hear. So you grew up in a religious background. Did you have religious guilt masturbating? I was just really
Hmm.
curious about that,
Mm-hmm.
because it may not even be a
I
religious guilt. Sorry, it may not even be a religious guilt, but like even me growing up, I'm not like super religious, but I still felt like, I guess, the shame too.
Yeah, I grew up Christian. Like I grew up going to church like my whole life, and it was like and if people are familiar with like Korean churches, they tend to be very like, if anyone's seen Beef, like
Yes.
um yeah, like you know how they're going to that Korean church and it's very intense, like it's very emotional, like it's what I grew up in my whole life. And so it was never an explicit, I don't know if I've ever explicitly at church they've been like you can't masturbate, but it was very much just, I don't know how you learn it as a kid, but it's already ingrained like that's like a bad thing. And I remember actually really distinctly like that, like especially this idea of like sex before marriage was huge guilt. So I would say to me like masturbation and sex was so much in the similar vein of like what all of that was like, all of it was like just sinful in that way. And so I think on top of that, and then having very strict parents, it just felt very guilt driven. But I think, yeah, like I think masturbation specifically, also there's a lot of the feeling of like, I think especially growing up as a girl, like a young girl, like you feel like you're not allowed to be like sexual or like being like this sexual being. Like it felt like, like the boys will masturbate, like that's like, like a thing, a rite of passage as you grow up. But it just never felt like we really talked about women masturbating, or like the idea that it was like pleasure. And so yeah, I think it really was that. And I had like recently someone say like they made a really good point that a lot of us when we grew up with the lens of how sex is supposed to be from a male perspective, but it's never like how sex is supposed to feel for you as like a woman. Like what do you want
Mm,
out of it? Because we grew up in this thing where it was like about guys and like them having an orgasm with all this stuff and like pleasing that person. And so I think all of it kind of chalked up to this like guilt in a lot of ways. But yeah, I think yeah, like I think everything was like pretty interconnected for me.
yeah. I think especially like talking about how like it's kind of like the male gaze, but like,
Yeah.
like especially with porn, it's like, that's not how it plays out, and nobody gets, well, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say nobody, but um I think a lot of, female pleasure doesn't necessarily come from just, going at it like that. There's a lot more
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
emotions that are involved, I think.
Yeah. I think I really believe in this perspective of like, I think, we always like to joke that like our vibrator is going to solve all problems, or like men should do better, like all these things. Because in a grand scheme of things, yes, it's like, it's a true statement with like a hint of jokes into it. But I think the biggest thing is that we didn't really we a lot of us didn't really get time to explore and understand our own body. So if I ask like for people, and including myself, like, well, what do you actually like, what things actually make you get more aroused, what things actually make you have an orgasm, what positions do you like, what motions, like all these things, sometimes like we don't even know the answer for ourselves. So it's sometimes it's like you can't put that onto someone else if you cannot be an advocate for yourself of what you like. And so that's why I'm such a big advocate of like masturbation, whether you use our vibrator or not. I mean, obviously, as a promo, would love for you to use our vibrator and get data, but just in terms of just understanding your sexual pleasure, it's so important to just like give yourself the opportunity of like what is good for you. And I think we don't get a lot of chances growing up to do that for ourselves. So yeah, I think it, especially for like Asian women, I think we've had a lot of people have really similar experiences in that.
Yeah. So with the Lioness, can you kind of talk about why you, like, how did that come about? You were at Amazon, and then how did
Yeah.
that happen?
Yeah, I it was like a lot. It's two factors I think that really happened. Was one, I loved mechanical engineering. I still love it to this day. Like I love the idea of like tinkering and the idea of thinking about something and then being able to build it. And so one thing I learned while I was at Amazon, I think at the time I had an incredible team that I worked with, but at the same time, like it was all dudes. And I realized when we build products and we say like this is a unisex product, or this is, anybody can use this. It's, again, it's built with a lot of times like the male gaze. It's built by men engineering the product, men designers, like all these different things. And so it just kind of gave me a moment of like, you study all of this time in college, you get the degree that you wanted, and then you're going into this like corporate job, and then just realizing like, oh, like it's kind of crazy that all these products that are like never really meant for me. And then very luckily at the same time, I had met a founder of a different sex toy company. The company doesn't exist anymore. And it was this guy, and I was like, how do you know what you're building works? Like, how do you know it like works for women? And he was like, oh, there's an industry standard where you put it on your nose, and that's what a clitoris feels like. And I remember just being like, there's just this sort of moment of like all the anger that I had when I felt like something was wrong with me, like, oh, this vibrator doesn't work, like, and it works for everyone else, like something's wrong with me, like my body is broken, like all these things. But it's that like it was never really designed with us in mind in the first place. And so I was that was like a key moment of me being like, I'm kind of curious about the sex toy industry. Like, what does it actually look like? And just finding out that it's historically male dominated, like as a whole, very male dominated space. A lot of times it was actually targeted to sell to men for them to like, because it'd be men coming to these stores being like, I want to spice up my relationship. I need this thing that's like pink and purple with a adult entertainer on the packaging and has like 500 functions, because that's what, it's gonna like spice up the relationship. So it was really never made with like, I think a lot of times like with women in mind. And so yeah, it was just like coming all together. I had this moment of like, I feel like I could engineer a better vibrator. And I feel like, yeah, there's something here where we're not really integrating technology with sex toys yet. And so it sounds all like a perfect package, but it was definitely like a slow burn. Like I think when I was like 23 figuring this company out, we were like constantly in flux of like, is this going to work? Like, is this what we should be doing? But I would say now, if I reflect back on my life, like those are probably two key moments where I was like, damn, I think I can engineer a better thing here.
Yeah. And did you ever test out the vibrator on your nose? Does that actually work?
Oh, okay. I do it sometimes from time to time. And the reason I think why that exists, and they will still do it, if you go to like sex toy conferences or shows or whatever, they'll always put on your nose or like the skin between your thumb and your pointer finger. And it's because there's a lot of nerves, heightened amount of nerves compared to the rest of your body, I guess. So I get it in the sense why they're saying that, but to me, it kind of reduces down like what people are looking for a vibrator. It's not just like, oh, it's super strong or super not, right? Like, so what you're feeling on your nose might feel good on your nose, but shitty on your clitoris. But if it feels good on your clitoris, it might not feel good on your nose. Like, it just doesn't really make sense to me. And actually, yeah, like we just found out a year and a half ago how many nerves the clitoris has, and like think about the fact that it was 2020, I think 2023 or 2022 when we found out how many nerves the clitoris has, which is like, how has this not ever been known before? And it's way more than what the nose has. So it's to over like 10,000 nerve fibers. So it's quite a
That's
lot. So
crazy.
it's a silly thing. I mean, I'm not going to knock people trying on their nose, but I'm not going to say that it's going to be a good indicator whether that vibrator is good or bad for you.
Yeah. So what has the research been like for you then? Like these
Mm.
sex experiments, is that what's part of that?
Yeah, so it's twofold. So we are working with academic researchers and doctors to actually expand the research in like the medical literature world or like the academic research world, which is very different than yeah, we everyone knows it's a slow moving thing. Also, sex stuff tends to be difficult to be funded and especially in research. But yeah, we have some really cool research that is always going on because of some of the incredible researchers we work with. Sex experiments is something that we're actually launching. Is one of the things we knew, and we knew like our thing was like during the pandemic, I started posting these videos of like, here's what my orgasm data looks like. I'm not showing anything sexually explicit. Like, this is literally what my data looks like. This is what it looks like if I drink a ton of caffeine. And then I would just show people the data. And I would just start doing those kinds of like, it's a little silly. It's a little like, we call it like an adult science fair project. If you like, when you grew up, like if you did those like trifold poster board where you're like, I wanted to see if wool will keep the water warmer. You know, like it was just
Yeah,
like
yeah.
silly things you did as a kid science project.
I've watched
So
the videos though, and I'm like,
yeah.
I'm so intrigued and like entertained. Like you're such a good speaker on top of that, and it's like, wow, I just like consume so much science. Normally, science to me, I'm sorry, it doesn't compute in my brain. But you break it down so that it's actually like understandable for people like me. So
Oh,
yeah,
thanks.
I
I
enjoy
mean, I
it.
think it's because I also just like it like that. I don't think science has to be so complicated all the time. Like, it should be fun. And sex is, at the end of the day, like a fun thing, right? So,
Hmm.
yeah, so sex experiments is going to be where our users, we're all going to basically take the month to being like, this month we're going to focus on something, right? And then everyone's going to set their hypothesis if that thing is going to make their orgasms better, worse, or the same. And then you'll do one without, and then you'll do at least three with whatever factor that we're introducing that month. And then we're just going to help you do like a whole data report of like, here are the insights we found. Like, here, did the orgasms get longer? Did they get stronger? So we want people to get curious about sex experimenting with their body and sex exploring, like the idea of like being curious about your body. Like, maybe it doesn't just have to be what you like. Like, what if you try something that you haven't done before? So our whole thing is like, we want to help people feel really curious about their body and not scared. So
Hmm.
that's what sex experiment's all about. It's like a very silly take on, it's a silly fun way to take like science experiments that you used to do as a kid.
Yeah. And so what are some of the what are some of the most surprising facts from the research
Hmm.
that you've done so far?
So I would say the most popular one that we was published, the abstract was published in the Journal of Sexual Medicine, and I think this one really like took win in media. Like, I think as the when the paper got published, like media just started picking it up as like, this company and this research, this is the thing. And it's something that we love talking about, is like orgasm patterns. So we found that there's three specific types of orgasm patterns that happen during the orgasm. So how your muscles are contracting and relaxing, there's like a specific pattern. The most common we call the ocean wave pattern. It's like a very rhythmic squeeze and relax, just like this. This most common, most people will have this like very rhythmic contraction. We have the avalanche, which starts really high in force. So you squeeze really hard and then it goes down in force, but it still has that up and down. And so slopes downwards. So you start high pulsing and then low pulse, so like weaker and weaker pulses. And then the volcano type, which is your classic movie esque type of orgasm, you see this like huge explosion of force and then a huge drop down, and there's not that much of a rhythmic pattern.
Hmm.
So that's from the data that we had and the amazing people that use our Linus who contributed their data to for science. So that always is like the first thing I always tell people, like, you should start guessing like what pattern you might be, because we've seen typically you stay the exact same pattern. So I'm not a volcano one day and then a ocean wave. Like, for me, I'm an ocean wave pattern, and I'm like consistently an ocean wave pattern for the most part. So I always tell people, like, even if you don't have the lioness, you should maybe like think about the last time you had an orgasm and like how your pelvic floor muscles were contracting during then, and then try to think about like what pattern you might be. So I always say like that's the most popular one that people love. Like, it's almost like a new horoscope, like zodiacs, you know?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
people
yeah.
love
Oh
it.
my god. Now next time next time I have an orgasm, my brain's gonna be like,
Yeah,
wait, what's happening right now?
you should.
Which of the
I
pattern am I having right now?
You have no idea, like, what an odd, it's such a weird thing to say, but like, what an odd masturbator I have become, because I get very like, what did I think about that? Like, what did I like about it? Or like, what could what was different about it? I get very
Like,
analytical. Like,
yeah.
it's like work almost in a weird way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh my god, that's hilarious. So I think I watched one of your videos where you said that you masturbated for a whole month.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? Because I feel like that's almost like a lot of work.
Girl, I I'm really happy that I did it. I don't remember how I even came to this point where I was like, I should try it. So I masturbated every single day for an entire month because I was like, okay, these little nice like with caffeine, without caffeine, with THC, without like it's fun. But I was just curious if it just changes, like what things I can learn from it. So aside from just using the Linus every day, I actually like made a spreadsheet where I was like tracking my mood, my like I didn't have an aura ring at the time, so I was just tracking like how aroused was I before I started masturbating, and then after, like what did I use to masturbate? Did I watch like porn to get off? Like all these different things. I was like tracking everything. So it was really cool. I actually worked with the data analyst to help me analyze the data in terms of like, can we find statistical significance in any of this information, all this stuff. It
Mhm.
was really cool on a high level. Doing the work of it, like I think people are like, yeah, like that would be so fun. But there were so many days where I was like, oh my god, I don't want to masturbate. But then I'm like, oh, I don't want to break my streak. And then it almost was like, oh, I have to do it because it's like part of work. And then you have this moment where you're like, can you believe that this is my work, that I have to masturbate every day, and then I'm like complaining about it? It's like it's such a crazy like mix of reaction feelings and things like that. But there were definitely days where I was like, oh man, I don't want to do it. But I really put, it's hard work.
I know there are days where I'm like, I feel like I want to come, but like I
Yeah.
just don't want to do the work
The
before.
effort's high.
Yeah,
Yes.
it takes a lot of work to get there. So I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna call it a night. But I'm like to do that every night for a whole month. I don't know. I don't know if I could do it.
I
But I
know,
feel
because
like,
even, yeah,
yeah, like the climax part, maybe it's like the payoff.
the payoff. There were days like that I was so stressed, or like, I think those days where I was like either very low arousal, or I was traveling, so I was jet lagged, or like things like that. So there were actually days that I never even had the orgasm.
Mm,
But those were interesting to track because it made me think about like, if you do have an orgasm, or if you do masturbate even without, like when you weren't in the mood, or like does it help you understand, like feel better, like does it lift your mood, like all this stuff. So it was like a really cool thing to do. It was crazy for me to have published it, I think, online. Sometimes I think about it, and I like posted on Reddit, and it had gone viral on Reddit too. And it was just this moment of like, wow, like I perpetually have like, I can't believe this is my life sometimes. But yeah, I feel blessed overall for it.
yeah, that sounds like a pretty like it sounds like a good job. I think a lot of people would love
Yeah,
to be in that position.
100%. I have to be grateful.
Yeah. So going off of that, I hear a lot of females, they never had an orgasm. I know I have friends who've never had an orgasm before.
Mhm.
I guess from a more scientific perspective, can you explain what that is and how do you
Like
get there?
why?
Yeah.
Ooh, it's a good, great question. Yeah, so I would say like, so obviously I'm not a doctor, so it's hard to say like a diagnosis of like what could be happening. But the one thing I love to tell people is like, it's very, I think sometimes just the idea of letting you know like how common it is. Like it is a very common experience that most women actually experience in some point of their life, or they have never had the orgasm, or they used to and it just has disappeared. And there's a lot of it's a lot of mixed things of both mental and physiological that are things that are happening. And it could be perpetuated by this thing of like, if you are so focused on it and then you are getting so upset that you can't have the orgasm, and then you're getting really into your head, that could also be helping you prevent from having the orgasm as a whole. Also, I have to say, like, there's a point of this idea in society, like, because it's been such a taboo topic, we just really never were given cues of, like, how do you explain to someone what an orgasm feels like, or what it's supposed to be, what it's supposed to feel like. So I always say, like, there's a multitude of things that could be happening. Unfortunately, you have, even as if you went to a doctor, I'm sure they'll be like, unless there's like something physiologically, maybe that's preventing you. But um, there's so many reasons I think why that could be happening. If you could find somebody that is like a trusted doctor or a sex therapist, or somebody that you could have access to talk to, I would highly recommend it. Pelvic floor therapists are also like incredibly knowledgeable people that don't get enough high phrases, I think, in our world. And but I would say like the biggest thing is just giving yourself the time to understand your body from all aspects. And I always tell people like it never just starts from like the bedroom of like like being like I'm gonna masturbate with this toy. It better happen is less of the mentality. I would say like it really starts from like the self care of like, are you being good to yourself? Are you taking care of your body? Are you doing things that just put you in a good mind state, right? Like, is taking a bath going to help you like relax? And like all these things that are not sexual from like a, yeah, not like explicitly sexual, but just these ideas of like being good to your body. And I think taking care of your body, I think as a whole. So I would say like, I always tell people like, it really starts from like, taking a bath. I always taking a bath is always like a good one for me. Is like okay because it's time intensive, but it's a moment where I'm like okay, I'm in this thing. I'm doing it for myself. Like what a great way to kind of end the day or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say it's that, and then just like giving yourself some time to like learn about different like how the body works, how orgasms look, like all these like little knowledgeable things. I think especially for me has helped me so much feel comfortable. It like takes the sex out of sex. Like it brings in like this nerdy element where you're kind of more understanding your body. It's the same way of, for example, if you're a runner, right? Or if you wanted to get into running, you're going to do all this research. You're reading on like what things you should be doing, what, like time, like getting timers or getting these like fitness trackers or getting these like listening to these podcasts. Like, I think that act of being like, I'm curious about it and I'm going to take the time to understand it will actually help so much. And it feels like a lot of work, or maybe there's a lot of shame in it of like, I don't want to be listening to a sex podcast or things like that. But I think it's one of the best things you can do. It's like you're learning anything else. You would take time to learn it. Like sometimes it just doesn't happen just because you're stimulating your clitoris or using this toy that everyone says is gonna blow your mind. So I always say like it really comes with like being gentle with yourself. And I would just say like take the nerdy aspect of it. Learn things, read about things, listen to some podcasts, and like yeah, become kind of like a sexpert.
Yeah. Um, you were talking about like how, some vibrators, not all or sorry, you were saying how this vibrator that everybody uses and it's like mind blowing. I remember I bought a vibrator that I can't remember what they're called. Some pink vibrator, obviously.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it was the one it was quite expensive, and it was like the most popular one, but it didn't do anything for me. And I thought it was
Hmm.
like my fault. Um so can you kind of talk about that a little bit? Like, I guess not all vibrators work for everybody. Like, do you need to find the right vibrator, or how does that work?
Yeah. Oh man. Yes, as a whole, like if you have the opportunity to go to like a sex toy shop that feels nice, like not those like seedy, dark lit ones that are like
Mm,
it's mostly like a porn shop, like something that's like very open, light, bright setting where you can actually try a lot of the toys on your hand and stuff like that. I think that one is very helpful. The sex toy industry, it's interesting because it's so much regulations in the space of not being able to advertise, right? So we haven't been able to do traditional forms of like meta ads or things that would actually grow an e-commerce company like in a textbook way. And
mm,
so what happens is that a lot of times you rely on influencers or people that are writing blog reviews or like, in forums like Reddit and being like, oh, I would do this one. This one's like amazing. I love it. A lot of those might be affiliate or like paid without even them marking it as an affiliate sponsor. So the disappointing part of it is it's really hard to say like this is not going to work or work for me because someone's like, oh, this is amazing, like it like made me have an orgasm in 2 seconds. And everyone's body is so different. It's Yeah, I think it's a big variety. I would say there's like a lot of like high level things I would go for is like, do you want it to be insertable anally, vaginally, or not at all? Like, do you want it to just touch your clitoris? And like, generally, if it touches your clitoris, do you like it when it's like straight directly on the clitoris or around the area, like around the clitoris, not directly on it. Like I would start kind of going from there and then start looking at toys of like, okay, these ones are gonna be direct or these ones are insertable. And if you're having insertable, like how big do you want it, I guess, as like a toy that's inserted, because they tend to be quite big. And even when we did our research and why the Linus is the size that it is, some people were like, oh, it's smaller than I expected, is because like most people, it's the concept of husband dick. Like most people are not looking for massive things to be inserted. Like
Yeah.
most people like kind of like small approach, not small, approachable sizes. And so yeah, it's a mix of things. I would say like it's a little bit of like, yeah, there might be some advertising that's happening without you even knowing, when people are like, this is the best, it's going to be the amazing. Also the variety of just people and their experiences and what they like can be totally different. So I always encourage people, if they can, like go to somewhere where you can touch and like play around with it, turn the motors on and see if that might be your vibe. But yeah, unfortunately, the toughest part of this space is it's kind of like you buy it and then you have to try it to know whether you liked it, and you kind of become better and better about like, I think this one I'm gonna like. Like I'm actually, when I buy vibrators now, like I'm pretty specific about like, it's like clothes, right? Like some people are like, oh, I'm not gonna buy it because it has this white trim and white colors don't look good on me. Like I get very analytical about what I think I'll like, and sometimes I'll buy something that I'm like, didn't think it was going to be my thing, and then I end up liking it. So yeah, but it unfortunately comes at the cost of like paying for it, I think, unfortunately.
Yeah. That's interesting. I didn't know that vibrators could get so detailed of like on the clitoris, around the clitoris.
Yes.
I've only had that one, and it was because it was the most popular one, and then it didn't do anything for me. So I was quite disappointed. I'm like, I'm never spending my
Oh.
money on this again. But maybe I need to go into a sex shop and actually, test it out
Yeah,
before buying.
yeah. And then just get like, I like, if anyone's like really into clothes shopping, like I also get very like particular about clothes. So in the same vein, like I would take sex toys just like that. Like be like, yeah, I deserve to be in here. I deserve to like take my time and look at stuff. And then just like, if it's like a nice shop, they're also incredibly knowledge people that usually work there. They're usually very passionate about this space. I would take the time, ask questions, like all of this stuff. So, but yeah, the sex toy space gets, the varieties are crazy. Like even sometimes I'll see things that I'm like, wow, I didn't even know they make something like that. So I'm always impressed. I just recently saw one that you put like fluid, like a, it's like a lubricant. It's supposed to look like semen, and then you like goes through the channel, so it's like it simulates ejaculation. And I was like, dang, that's very creative. So I'm always
Interesting.
impressed.
And you put it inside you, and then it ejaculates?
Yeah, like it simulates the ejaculation for people, whether if you have that kind of kink or like things like that.
Yeah, yeah.
There's like ones that will like lay eggs in you. It just
Like a
gets really wild out there.
It's interesting. Have you ever heard of a ping
You
pong
can Google
show?
it later.
Yeah, I will.
Yes, yes.
I had a friend who told me, they're like, you, because I was in Thailand, and if you don't know what it is, you can Google it, or I might just spoil it a little bit. But yeah, it's interesting how like what the body can do, and I'm like, also the vagina is clearly very strong.
No, the vagina is people don't give enough credit for the vagina. You know when people are like, don't be a pussy, like I mean, like, I get where it comes from, but the vagina is very powerful, like
Yeah,
muscles. We actually, like, I did a whole thing on like how strong an orgasm tends to be. It's 64.9 gram force, typically on average. Like the strength that your vagina is squeezing during orgasm is around that there, and that's about the strength to break a hot Cheeto. So think about a hot Cheeto and like the force to like snap that. Like it's a pretty powerful muscle that I think people don't realize. And the ping pong show, I think probably that's why it blows people's minds, because they're like,
yeah,
how does that even work?
yeah. How many vibrators do you own? I'm just curious.
Oh, great question. I don't actually know. I have like
It's just
two
too
bins
many.
behind me. I have like two bins behind me. they're all full of toys over the years. I will say most of them, if I don't love them, I probably have broken them open because I'm curious about how it's built. Like at the end of the day, like I think I have an engineering brain. I'm very curious about how things are made and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm actually gonna do so. Following that 1 month masturbating every single day thing, I think the next thing I actually want to do is try a bunch of different toys with the Lioness inserted, and then just put data out there on like this is what it was like with the Rose suction vibrator. This is what it was like with this vibrator, and like not to bash on any toys at all. Like, but I just want to start getting like a master directory of all different toys, and then breaking it open, showing how that what it looks like inside. If I think the packaging is good, if I think the materials are safe, like just getting really deep into it. So whatever vibrators I have, I'm about to probably triple it.
Oh my gosh.
I
Yeah,
know
it's
it's
so
crazy.
interesting. Like next time I see a vibrator, I'm gonna be like, wow, there was a lot of thought put into this. Because you just think like,
Yeah.
yeah, you just think like, oh, I want to get a vibrator to make myself feel good. But now I think I have a much deeper appreciation for what goes into it.
Oh, I'm so glad. And but there are still bad apples out there like that I don't think are good. So if there's any that ever make you feel like, oh, it doesn't really feel like they put that much love into it, then I wouldn't buy those.
Yeah, yeah. I'll test it out beforehand.
Yeah, you can text me. I have personal thoughts and feelings about certain toys, but on a whole level, I like most toys.
What are your favorite toys?
Oh, outside of the lioness.
Yes, outside, of course. That's number one.
um, there's one that I've been using, and they don't know. I don't know the owners of the company or anything. There's a bullet rabbit vibrator, or sorry, a bullet vibrator. It has little rabbit ears, and the idea is that it's supposed to go between your clitoris, so it's like the two bunny ears and then your clitoris in the middle, so it like stimulates
Ah.
the both sides of it versus directly on top. I've had that vibrator. It's by Jeju, Jejoue. I've had
Mhm.
that bullet vibrator probably for like 6 years, and then it finally broke. The battery like finally just gave out, and I actually just rebought it, which I was very impressed with myself because I'm not typically someone that would like rebuy the same toy. But that's probably like if I'm not trying to bring a whole insertable toy or like really like get deep into like a whole session, and like it's kind of like a quick on the go thing, or if I'm traveling, it's probably the one that I brought around. And I actually tell people like who have never bought a vibrator, if they just want a bullet, like that's probably the one that I just personally would recommend for people.
Yeah. Okay. I think that
Yeah,
actually,
this
I
company
think you
now
sold
should
me.
sponsor me.
Yeah.
No,
This
by the Lioness.
true, true, true. I
I'm just
actually want
kidding.
to ask you, the Linus, like what did you think was missing in the market that you felt like you had to create this? I mean, I know that there's like
Mm,
the whole smart aspect of it,
yeah.
the data, but is there anything else about it that you want to share?
Yes, absolutely. So, I think the really cool thing is when we started in a time when the term sex tech wasn't coined as a term yet. Cindy Gallup from Make Love Not Porn has really pushed that term to be used as an industry term. But when we were around, like that term had never existed. So we were pretty early in like being like a women founded, women engineered company, like vibrator company hasn't really been a thing. I think. When we first started. And so it was really cool when we first started. We really were like, okay, if we had our ideal vibrator outside of it being smart, like what would it be? Some really interesting choices we made was like having a travel lock. So you can actually set it on your app to be travel locked so that when you travel, it's not going to accidentally go off in your bag. TSA is going to open it, check what's vibrating. And it was coming from a personal experience of it happening to one of our team members. And we were like, yeah, let's just put a like a travel lock. Low battery indicator, well, it'll let you know that it can probably you can use it one more time before it completely dies, because that's maybe the thing with the bullet vibrator I have. There's so many times I've been using it and then it just dies,
Oh
and there's
no.
no feeling. It's almost I almost hate it as much as mosquitoes. Like it's this feeling of like this rage that comes up in me. um so I was a low battery indicator, and actually the biggest one is we launched with only the gray color. against the suggestions of a lot of retailers and a lot of people in the industry. They were like, you no one's gonna buy a gray vibrator, but we were really in the perspective of like, they're only pink and purple because historically men were like, women love pink and purple, let's just keep making pink and purple ones. And then women bought pink and purple ones because that was the only thing available on the market. And then they're like, yeah, see, women love pink and purple, so they keep making it. So it's just this weird cycle. And we really want to make one that felt just a lot more neutral, like something that anybody could buy if you wanted to, and you don't have to feel like a very sexy, kind of girl, like you, like a woman or a person. Like you could just feel like, oh, like this is something that's like a tool for my own self experimentation. So we made it gray, and we have a purple color now that's like a really nice purple that we chose. But the gray is still our best seller. So I think there's a lot to be said in terms of even just color choices to give people a color choice that wasn't typically on the market, and now you're seeing so much more of that on the market. What else do we have? We have like the nub, it's really flexible, like the curvature on it is super flexible.
Ooh.
And we made this on purpose because there are so many that are really stiff, and it kind of like clamps on your body, and it doesn't always feel good if you like, for example, just your bone structure is a little bit different, like all this stuff. So we just put I think we've and my number of favorite is that it's a really ergonomic handle where it's meant to be held towards you. Most are like handles where it's like if you used it to somebody, maybe it's ergonomic, but it would not be comfortable using it to yourself. So we
Mm.
made it like a very purposeful curvature where it feels really nice to hold it. So I think we had so much fun thinking about like really design intentions of like what would we want in our favorite vibrator, if it even without it being smart. So yeah, a great question.
Yeah, I didn't even know it had so many features and so many things that you guys thought about that I wouldn't like. I would hate it if my vibrator went off in my bag. Actually,
Oh
that
yeah.
reminds me of a story. There was my sister was telling me that she was at work. She works at a restaurant, and somebody's bag was vibrating the whole shift. And everybody knew who it was at the end because they went to go grab their bag because everybody was waiting to see whose bag that was. And I'm like, that's so
Yeah,
embarrassing. But
yeah, but also impressive battery life on that whatever toy that was.
true, true. I love that you think about it like that too, right? You're always analyzing. You're like, good battery life. Yeah, but
Oh god.
that's smart that you guys have like that lock feature because I was like, oh my gosh, that poor woman.
I know, dang. See, but so many of us have those kinds of stories that, and it's such a simple fix that I'm always like, why don't we just fix it, kind of thing. So, uh, but yeah, that also cracks me up that I just never even thought that I'd probably think a little differently at this point, and being like, wow, that is great battery life. I wonder what toy that was.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, that's so embarrassing. You're like, great battery life. I'm like, that's true. That's a
I
good
know.
point.
I'm always telling people like, I'm still just like a typical normal person, but I realize I've probably been in this world for so long that yeah, it's crazy.
Oh, that's funny. Okay. Let's see. Oh, I wanted to ask you. I know you made a video about this, but when females come,
Hmm.
we sometimes some females squirt. Is that
Hmm.
pee or
P.
not?
Great question. It's so the I think the coolest one that you can quote back to is there's a research paper where they did an ultrasound of the bladder during right before the squirting happens, and then right after. So right before, even if the bladder is empty, right before the person squirts, they did see that the bladder does increase, and then after squirting, it goes back. So is it pee? It's a mixture. It's mostly water. It's like water substances. Like there's a whole chemical breakdown. So if you look at the chemical breakdown, yes, there's going to be some sort of urine in it. And on a whole level, are you just peeing as if you were peeing in a toilet? No. So I always tell people like it's especially people that have ever interacted with a penis. Like a penis has one hole, right? Everything comes out of that one specific hole. So if you have ever interacted with a penis, you have probably pee has been interacted with you, like you have interacted with pee at the same time in some shape or
Mm.
form.
Okay.
So I always tell people like to relate it to this idea that it's just pee. It kind of brings like a grossness to a lot of people who are not into you like peeing, kinks or anything like that. It brings in this thing element that it's like something that's gross, which I absolutely don't think it's gross at all. I think it's an incredibly interesting thing that people don't take advantage of how cool and interesting way to do that. Um, so it's a mixture, but I would say it's not the same pee as if you were literally your bladder is full and you peed in a toilet, maybe on the high
Mm.
level, yeah. So it's
Mm.
mostly waterish stuff.
Yeah. I think that's like something that I've always been curious about. TMI. Anyways.
No, I will also say like I was always told people like I don't think everyone squirts, and I said it because I had never done it, and I was like I've tried so many times, and I was like it's just not in me. It's not me as a person. There's an incredible person, one of my really dear friends, Kenneth Play. He's known as like a sex hacker. Vice has covered him multiple times. He's so incredibly knowledgeable. I learned so much about him from like research, and then from research perspective, anatomy, all that. And I think reading a lot of his stuff on like squirting and like how to make it happen. And then there's toys like the Enjoy is really popular. It's a super curved stainless steel one. I am like now a majority believer that most people can do it. Like I'm
Mm.
pretty positive. Uh, it's a lot of like you have to take that stigma away, and then I think just different techniques. Sometimes you just cannot do it just with your hands and or for yourself, kind of. And so maybe like a toy would help, or another person could help. But I think it's cool. I think it's such a cool thing that again, it's like a very cool human body thing that happens. So
Yeah, yeah.
I'm a fan.
Yeah. I agree. Um
Not you, both of us trying not to expose ourselves too
yeah.
much.
Like agreed.
Some might say agreeable, yes, yes.
Do you do you think it's important to have a vibrator or to masturbate if you have a partner?
Yes, I think it is completely two separate things. I hear all the time they're like, "Oh, I want to get a toy, but I have a partner," like all this stuff. There are so many research papers. On the idea that, or there's so many research papers that in research for people that are in a relationship and you still own a vibrator and you masturbate and their partner knows that you own a vibrator, statistically significantly higher sexual satisfaction, better relationship, all of that. Like there's some level of communication to know that a sex toy is never meant to replace someone. It is a collaborator, it is not a competitor. Like it just adds, versus you shouldn't feel like it's taking away from your partnership experience. Masturbating is a whole separate thing. Like I think um, yeah, I feel very strongly about that one for sure.
Yeah. Are there any misconceptions about like the female sexual pleasure that you kind of want to talk about?
Hmm. I think okay, so I think owning a toy incredible, masturbating incredible. Probably the biggest one that I get asked about is if you can masturbate too much and it ruins sex or your ability to have an orgasm in partner sex. There's been plenty of papers in the past that show that a typical vibration set standard on a vibrator, like maybe if you're using a jackhammer, I like can't vouch for it, but a sex toy like a typical motor, like that does not desensitize your clitoris permanently or any of your nerves. Like I think that's a very common myth that comes around, is that it'll permanently numb you out. Maybe if you're using a really strong one, in that moment might numb you out for just that time, but it will always come back as long as you're not doing some sort of nerve damage. So I always tell people like there's so much fear that like sex toys ruin sex, and I think yeah, you might have gotten used to a style of having an orgasm, but um yeah, it's again like a big thing that people love to scare other people about owning a toy or masturbating quote unquote too much.
So we're gonna do like a quick segment. So it's called "You Dim Some, You Win Some," and it's a new segment on the show where
Ooh.
I'm reading letters from the Not At All community. So if anybody wants to send their questions or anything you want to talk about on the show, just send it via DM or email. You answered one of them already, where someone asked if too much masturbation can be harmful, um,
Hmm.
because this person was masturbating like 5 to 8 times a day, and they were saying they're not sore at
Hmm.
all, but sometimes they think they do it too much and it could be harmful. But
Really quick note on that: if you're not in some sort of injury, and if it is not interacting with your day to day life, your relationships, your people, like hanging out with people, getting your work done, like all this stuff. If it is not interfering with that, do you? But I think if you are missing work or you are not hanging out with your friends or family, maybe worth reevaluating a little bit.
mm, yeah, that makes sense. I can't climax vaginally. Whenever I masturbate or have sex, I will use clitoris stimulation. I find that no matter how horny or turned on I am, it doesn't matter. Any advice is appreciated.
Yes. Oh my God. Real quick. Okay. So this is the clitoris.
Oh,
I think nowadays people see it all the time. This yellow part is the only part that's external that you see, right? Like this is the clitoris that we all know and love, and then you would have the vaginal opening here.
yeah.
Um, Most people will say almost all orgasms that are penetrative sex is still clitoral orgasms. Even vaginal penetration is because this whole part is internal. So when you're stimulating like this, you're still stimulating the clitoris inside. Some people's anatomy is different where it might be slightly shifted. So when you're doing penetrative sex, it might not be touching the clitoris internally.
Mm.
So almost most people, when they have an orgasm, is clitoral. So having to have some sort of interaction with this yellow part that's exposed, totally the most common. Absolutely common that most people will not have vaginal orgasms.
Yeah. I mean, we watch porn and like it's always like they don't really care about the clit and somehow they're still like having the best orgasm of their life. So I think yeah,
Yes.
there's a bit of that. Um I know it's okay to have a vibrator, but I'm ashamed of entering a sex shop or buying it online as it stays on my credit card record. Do you have any advice?
Hmm. Oh, I would say that depends on maybe thinking about why. Like if it's like because you have like a shared credit card with your parents, I think is a specific one thing. But I think maybe it's maybe more coming from like a societal stigma or like cultural stigma or something that has happened that you feel very uncomfortable with it. Really, I would say like the thing, and I really am coming from very similar perspective growing up and like to my early 20s and all of that. I think just a slow introduction, I call it planting seeds. It's constant planting seeds of like reading blog posts about people doing sex toy reviews, like all these little things that make you feel a little bit more comfortable. And maybe if they didn't make the huge leap yet, but it is planting seeds where you're like, oh, that's interesting, like now I know about that. So eventually maybe you can enter a sex toy shop and feel a little bit more comfortable. And I would say like look for sex toy shops if you ever travel or in your area, if there's ones that are very like women friendly, it's very brightly lit, it's very knowledgeable staff members, like those are the ones that I would go for. But there's a lot of sex toy online stores especially that really focus on that element and education element, and then it's sex toys. Like those are maybe ones that maybe feel a little bit more comfortable to shop in. But I would say as an actionable thing, plant seeds. Just little learning things. You read a blog post, you watch a podcast episode on sex toys. Just planting little seeds.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much, Anna, for your time today. We learned so
Yay!
much about sex and the female anatomy and female sexual pleasure. I've taken so much away from this. Where can
Yay!
people find you?
Yeah, so our company is Linus, like a female lion. So our website is linus.io. All of the social media handles for it is Linus Health. And then for my personal one, if you ever, I don't know, want to shoot me a DM or have questions or whatever, my Instagram is Anna is average. My TikTok is Anna the average. My marketing team think it's a nightmare that I don't have them be the same thing. I will fix it at some point. And then I also write for a sex advice column on Joy Sauce, which is like an Asian API media kind of website. So I do like a monthly, like a monthly sex advice column there. So you can always submit questions for that. It's called Fuck Around and Find Out with Anna.
Oh, I love that.
But yeah, I know it's very cute. It makes me
Yeah.
laugh every time.
Thank you so much, Anna.
Yes,
And
thanks for having me.
do you have any advice or any last words that you want to say about anything about the female sexual pleasure?
Yes, go flick the bean this weekend and every single day and do it for science. Learn about your body.
Oh my god, I love
Masturbating's
that.
awesome.
Do it for science, guys. Do it for
Do it for
science.
science.